Hey, welcome to another edition of Officers. My name is Sohan Maheshwar. I'm a dev advocate at Authorized, and today Evan's joining me. Welcome to the show, Evan.
Hey, good to be here, Sohan. Thanks for having me.
Sweet. So I think, Evan, I think this might be some sort of record in the tech world, but we've done like 6 or 7 live streams and we've not mentioned AI even once. And in 2025, hey, that's not super common. So, we thought we'd do something around AI. But all jokes aside, we are going to talk about securing RAG pipelines with fine-grained authorization. This is something that, we are seeing as a lot of trend, the whole day two AI ops thing. So, yeah, stick around. And yeah, let us know in the chat where you're watching from. I'm in unusually sunny Amsterdam, but I'm not complaining. And Evan, you're from North America, correct?
Yeah. I'm in Denver, Colorado today. Unusually cloudy Denver, Colorado, actually.
Okay. Nice. All right. So I think we can get started, and I'm just going to share my screen. The flow for today basically is I'll talk through a few slides about some architecture diagrams, some of the whys and wherefores, and then Evan's going to show us a great demo. And stick around for that because we're using OpenAI, Langchain, Pinecone, and SpiceDB to show you a demo of how this actually works. But you'll have to sit through me talking through slides for a bit first. And yeah, if you're following, unless you've been living under a rock, you know that everyone's talking about generative AI and LLMs. And yeah, I feel, Evan, in all of these tech shifts, the one that I've seen the fastest adoption is probably the whole AI and Gen AI trend.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a customer-facing engineer over here, and really, what we're seeing is a lot of folks coming to us who have kind of discovered this RAG thing and discovering these great solutions to semantically aware search. And they kind of they go through a hackathon, they implement it, and then it's day two, the hackathon's over, and it's like, okay, now how do I make this thing ready for my enterprise? How do I ensure that the data is actually only being seen and used to augment prompts for those who have permission to see that data. So it really is, it's a thing. Yeah.
Nice. And yeah, absolutely agree with you, Evan. And in fact, it's such a thing that OWASP, which stands for Open Worldwide Application Security Project. So they're like an industry player in the security and cloud security space. They actually published a list sometime last year about the top 10 risks for LLM applications, right? And I think three of those are things that actually can or are related to authorization or broken access control. And I'll talk through the three of them. The first one, sensitive information disclosure. I mean, we know that with, when you have an LLM and you have application context, some sensitive or information or PII or personally identifiable information can be leaked if there is no authorization around it. At the same time, in the rush to implement LLMs can have excessive agency, where the LLMs granted a degree of agency by a developer. And this enables, some things like ambiguous or manipulated outputs from the LLM, which, especially in the enterprise, is something that you don't really need. And in most implementations rather, there is a use of vector databases and embeddings. And again, if you're not authorized correctly or if you have broken access control, this could lead to things like manipulating model outputs, prompt injection attacks, and so on. So really, in the enterprise, this becomes so much more important because enterprises typically have, very, very strict or need very strict guardrails around their data. And enterprises want to focus on things like data security and accuracy, especially in places like healthcare and finance. So as Evan mentioned, I think customers are now seeing that, hey, we actually need data ops in the world of AI. And I'm actually reminded of this tweet by Mark Benioff, Evan, who is the CEO of Salesforce, where he had tweeted very publicly, of course, about how I think the co-pilot AI agents,
Mm-hmm.
had access data that it isn't supposed to, and things like that. This was, of course, like a few months ago, and
Mm-hmm.
it is something that enterprises are struggling with right now, and hence this live stream. So it goes without saying, but your LLM shouldn't have unauthorized access to sensitive enterprise data, right? And there are some mitigation strategies around this. I think it comes down to sort of building guardrails around this data to really prevent any oversharing that should happen. And I'll give you a typical example. So say you have a corpus of documents in your enterprise, and you have a chatbot that can read that document, and this chatbot uses an LLM. Now, when I try and speak to the chatbot, I should only be able to access information that I'm authorized to view in this enterprise. And unless there are these guardrails around it, that sometimes cannot happen. So that's the idea behind, having this authorization for your LLMs. And the thing is, while doing all of this, you also want to optimize your query response quality and efficiency. So that's going to be part of today's demo as well. Now, a common way we're seeing enterprises really implement AI is through something called a RAG pipeline. And if you're not familiar with what a RAG pipeline is, that's absolutely fine. RAG stands for Retrieval-Augmented Generation, and it's a architecture approach we're seeing fairly commonly right now. And essentially, it's where you use a large language model and you use your custom data. So you're not just using that LLM; you're augmenting the usage of this LLM with some custom data, so you can build something like a chatbot to speak to and to retrieve data from this corpus of documents that you might have. And it's used in things like Q&A systems and domain-specific knowledge, where, say, an LLM doesn't specifically have knowledge about something internal, it can actually, get that via this RAG pipeline. Let's take a look at an architecture diagram as to how a RAG pipeline typically looks. So there are two main phases of a RAG pipeline, and the first phase is the ingestion itself. So you have a knowledge base of data, which could be structured or unstructured, and essentially that data is pre-processed, and all of that is sent into this embedding model to create embeddings that are stored in a vector database. An easy way to think of an embedding is think of like different characteristics of something. So say if I'm talking about this diary, I would say embeddings would be like, oh, it's red in color, it's this size, and so on. And all of those characteristics are stored in a vector database. Now, there is a second phase to this, which is the query, the retrieval, and the response model. So you have a user, such as yourself, making a query, which first goes to the embedding model. You get an embedded query, and then that is sent to the vector database to get your relevant embeddings, which is your context. And you can actually send things like metadata when you're doing this, right? So you can send things like indicate object of origin, like, hey, this is from document 123, and so on. And finally, that's sent to an LLM, and you get a response. The thing here is there is no authorization anywhere here. So if this user asks for some data that they are not privy to access, then, well, they can actually see it. So that's what we are going to show you, how you can build authorization into a RAG pipeline. And yeah, let's talk about it. So I think there are two ways you could typically do, you can add fine-grained authorization to these RAG pipelines. The first one is a post-filter authorization approach. As the name suggests, the filtering happens after you get or you speak to the LLM. So earlier I had said you can attach metadata to embeddings to indicate the object of origin. So you can actually perform a check for each relevant embedding to see if the user has permission to actually view this document. So this is maybe SpiceDB specific, but you can run a check permission request, and until we have enough embeddings to actually issue a prompt. And you can also specify that, hey, I need 5 pieces of additional context before I make a prompt to the LLM, or exhaust all of the embeddings returned before doing so. And this actually allows for fine-grained authorization on your embeddings, but it really depends on your use case, because if you have a low positive hit rate from your vector database, then it's not super efficient. So say you have 1,000 embeds in your database and you can view only one, you have to filter through all of them. So it can be, in that context, not very efficient. So it really depends on your use case if you want to use a post-filter authorization. And there is also the pre-filter approach, which is the demo that we'll be showing today, which again, as the name suggests, you're doing the filtration beforehand. So we make a query, we embed a query, and we ask our authorization system, what can we actually have access to? And you're getting an array back, so that happens here. And you're passing that array as a filter, and yeah, and then it pretty much follows the same steps. So in today's demo, Evan's actually going to show us how you can do that.
Yeah.
And yeah, sorry,
I would
go
say
ahead.
it's worth mentioning. I get a lot of like kind of comments and questions about how do I kind of determine which approach is right for me, because we've kind of presented the pre-filter approach, the post-filter approach, um, and and the answer is it depends. A lot of it comes down to like a positive hit rate. So if you have a high positive hit rate, meaning that you go ahead, you make this query to your vector database, and you're getting results back, and 90% of the results coming back, your users are having access to, and the patterns like that tend to lend themselves a little bit better to that post-filter approach. The pre-filter approach tends to be a little bit more advantageous when you have a kind of a lower positive hit rate, and maybe a lower number of objects that a user can access overall. So if we're talking to maybe a user has permission to view 10, 20 million objects, we're talking maybe that could be a difficult, a very large array, right? And so when we start seeing things like that, that's when we actually kind of go back to pre-filter and post-filter. So there is a kind of some nuance into which approach you choose. And if anyone's ever interested and wants to kind of talk through their options for their scenario, I'm always happy to chat in Discord.
Yeah. Or folks, if you have any questions about your particular use case, again, we're happy to talk about what approach would fit better. Evan, I actually have a question to you. So when you're speaking to customers, how do they evaluate, which approach to go to? Is it one of those things where you test out both, look at numbers, and then choose an approach? Or do you have an indication beforehand that's saying, hey, this one is definitely the better one for us?
Yeah, typically after some conversations, we have an idea of where we want to start. What we're seeing particular interest in an Auth-Z enterprise feature called Materialize, or kind of around these use cases. The kind of the TLDR of Materialize is that it can either denormalize authorization data, so kind of form a denormalized ACL list either outside of SpiceDB, or it can be used to significantly accelerate queries like lookup resources or bulk check permissions for post-filtering and pre-filtering. So we're kind of seeing a lot of interest in Materialize when it comes to these kind of RAG pipeline use cases.
Nice. Yep. For folks watching, the other Evan at Auth-Z and myself did a stream on Materialize sometime back. So if you want to check out details about it, it's on our YouTube. You can also check out Auth-Z Materialize on our website. Yeah. So for today's demo, essentially, we are going to be talking about the pre-filter approach. And for our vector DB, we're using Pinecone. For our LLM, we're using OpenAI, but really you can be using pretty much any LLM there. In fact, in the GitHub link that I shared to you, there's also a branch where we're using OpenRouter, which essentially is the service where you can like swap in and out different LLMs, So you can just say DeepSeek or Claude or whatever, and OpenRouter will route a request to that different LLM. So, it's on the link. And of course, we're using SpiceDB as our authorization or our permission system. I'm assuming most people who are watching right now are familiar with SpiceDB, but here's a quick 1.5 minute pitch. Essentially, it's a permission system based on the Google Zanzibar model. So it uses something called ReBAC, or relationship-based access control, where instead of storing things in a list of say roles, or instead of storing only attributes like in access-based control, you actually store permissions as as different relationships. So someone there's a document and a user, and there's a relationship between the document and the user. So that could be user is a reader of the document, or user is a writer of the document. And based on those relations, you can have different permissions. And of course, check our YouTube channel for like how it works and all of that. But that's like the very quick TLDR. I think I did the best I could in like 90 seconds, but yeah. And
The elevator explanation.
the elevator pitch, yes, for
Yes.
SpiceDB. Yep. So I'm going to put the link, of course, in right here. I'm looking for it. This is the demo. In our GitHub link, we also have like a self-guided workshop, so you can follow it step by step if you want to do it later on. And essentially in this demo, yeah, we're going to be using a SpiceDB instance, so you'll need that, which you can get off of GitHub, but also a Pinecone account, an OpenAI account. And for this demo that Evan's showing us, we're using a Google Colab notebook, but you can also do this using Jupyter local notebook. So yeah, Evan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sohan. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen here.
And folks, if you have any questions at any time, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm just seeing only one half of my face is illuminated right now because the curtain on the right side here is broken. I broke the rod recently, so
Oh,
I
bad
just
timing.
messed up. Yeah, just have bad lighting right now. Yeah.
The first sunny day in Amsterdam history, and your curtain's broken. It's not good.
No, yeah.
All right. Yeah. So let's go ahead and kind of get into the nitty gritty of the demo here. So what we're looking at Google Colab. Colab, if you haven't used it before, it is kind of a neat way to run these Python notebooks. It eliminates a lot of, hey, it works on my machine kind of issues, because it is running as a cloud kind of hosted notebook. And so you can go ahead. Well, I think we'll drop the link in the description. You can either run this or you can run a more traditional Jupyter notebook. I think we've also linked out to that as well. And yeah, I totally recommend that you check it out and try to run it after our webinar today. So what we're looking at here, we're looking at our first block is just basically installing our dependencies. So we're going to go ahead and execute that. That's going to take a second to run. While that's running, I just wanted to kind of briefly explain how you could run this Colab notebook on your own if you wanted to. So once you get the link to this Colab notebook, the main thing you're going to want to look for is the secrets. In the left-hand side here, it's just this key icon. We've set up 4 secrets to run this demo today. I think they're all fairly self-explanatory, but we'll walk through them. The first one is the OpenAI key. OpenAI API key. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And the next one is the Pinecone API key. I think also fairly self-explanatory. One thing with the OpenAI API key is that you'll want to make sure you have credits inside of your OpenAI account. Otherwise, you might hit an error. I think the error is typically pretty self-explanatory, but that's just something you want to look out for. This thing here is a prefix. So because we're running in the cloud, we're actually just connecting to something called SpiceDB serverless. We can provide a link to SpiceDB serverless in the description if you would also like to run this on SpiceDB serverless, which is how I'd recommend it if you're doing Colab. SpiceDB serverless is something that is kind of used today for kind of testing and a bit of development. Not something we see people running in production. And it's because there are a few limitations. One of those limitations is that you actually have to attach a prefix in front of all your object definitions. So to make that a little bit easier, I've actually just created a prefix as a secret, and you'll see a little bit later on why we are attaching those prefixes. And then here we have the SpiceDB API key. This also should be pretty self-explanatory, I think. Okay, so we are, looks like we have our dependencies installed. Now we are going to go ahead and set some environment variables that have our secrets that worked well. And then also I want to say here, I'm going to be moving pretty quick. I'm not going to be going through every line of code line by line. We're kind of just going to be doing the highlights. And so if you kind of want to analyze every code line by line, definitely recommend looking at our notebooks, either in the examples repo or in the Colab, which we've linked, I believe. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and write a schema to SpiceDB. So here we have our schema. It's a fairly simple schema. We have users and we have articles. And users can relate to an article as a viewer. And if you relate to an article as a viewer, then you can view that article. We are using our prefix variables here because in SpiceDB serverless, we have to add this unique prefix ahead of our object definitions. So that's why you're seeing prefix here. So let's go ahead and let's write our schema. Okay, looks like we've written our schema. Now the next thing we can do is kind of move forward and write some relationships to SpiceDB. So we're going to write two relationships here. This first one is going to relate the user Tim as a viewer to article 1, 2, 3. And the second relationship is going to relate the user Tim as a viewer to article 4, 5, 6. So let's write those relationships. All right, they are written. Now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take a break from SpiceDB and start setting up our serverless Pinecone index. So what we're going to do here, we're going to go ahead and create that. Not a whole lot to talk about here. Pinecone makes it really easy. Just to go ahead and set up a serverless index that we can use to store our embeddings. So we'll give that a second, make sure that goes. Yep. Okay, so it took us a few seconds, but our serverless index is created. So now we have a place to go ahead and store our embeddings and then subsequently query for our embeddings. So now let's move on to storing our embeddings. So what we're going to do here is we're going to upsert this embedding. This embedding says that Bill Gates won the 2025 Oscar for the best football movie. A few things here. This is fictitious. There is no such thing as best football movie, and Bill Gates certainly didn't win it. We're using this kind of fictitious piece of data, this piece of text, because any LLM won't know this. So we can kind of treat this as private information. So we might have this bit of private information that Bill Gates won a 2025 Oscar for the best football movie. And the important thing here is that we include some metadata along with our text that describes where this text originated from. So we want to include some metadata on an authorizable object. So in our case, we are authorizing view permission on articles. So what we want to do here is we actually want to include the article ID along with the text so that this article ID becomes some metadata on the embedding that's generated by this text. And so what we can do here is we can go ahead and upsert our embedding that Bill Gates won the 25 Oscar for the best football movie, along with its metadata. So great, we've gone ahead and upserted that or written that up to our Pinecone index. And now what we're going to do is we're going to come back to SpiceDB. So as we kind of touched on earlier, we're actually going to be using a pre-filter approach in the demonstration today. And so the pre-filter approach is going to involve the SpiceDB Lookup Resources API. The SpiceDB Lookup Resources API is going to give us a list of objects that a user has a permission on, or any subject has a permission on. So in this case, we're going to get a list of articles that our user can view. In this case, we are asking what articles can the user Tim view. So let's go ahead and generate that list of articles that the user Tim can view. And we can see here we have an array of article IDs. And in that array is ID 1, 2, 3 and ID 4, 5, 6. What we're going to go ahead and do now, so now we have our list of authorized IDs, and we can use our list of authorized article IDs as a filter when we make our query to our vector database. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a query, and we're going to augment. So we're going to make a question. Our user is going to type a question. So we're going to ask, who won the 2025 Oscar for the best football movie? Any LLM is not going to have the answer to this because it's fictitious. It doesn't exist. So in order to be able to answer this question, our system is going to need to be able to augment this prompt with data from our Pinecone index. And you can see here that when we are making our query to Pinecone, we're actually going to be providing a filter. And that filter is a list of authorized articles. So when we make this, query, who won the 2025 Oscar for the best football movie? We should get the answer that is Bill Gates, because we had permission to view the article that contained the text that indicated who won the 2025 Oscar for the best football movie. Now, let's see what happens when we take away permission to view article 1, 2, 3. So we're going to delete the relationship that relates the user Tim to article 1, 2, 3. So we delete that relationship in SpiceDB. And now we're going to rerun our lookup resources request. And we'll give it one more second. And we can see that Tim can view 4, 5, 6. We're using the minimize latency consistency option today. So minimize latency, it maximizes performance, but it means that by default, our results can be up to 5 seconds stale. So that's actually why we saw in our first lookup resources request that we could see 1, 2, 3. And then now, even if we run it again, we should just be seeing 4, 5, 6. We could do probably a whole nother webinar on the SpiceDB consistency options. Maybe we should someday.
I think we should, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's like a whole, it's really interesting. But today, just know that was expected, and that we do have ways we can, make more, requests that guarantee fresher data if we have scenarios where we need to. Okay, so let's move on. We know that Tim can view document 4, 5, 6. And now we can go ahead and run our query again. So this is just the ask function. So this ask function is what we defined here. So we're running the same function again. This time, however, the user Tim can only view document 4, 5, 6. So let's see what happens when Tim can only view 4, 5, 6. And there's just no information. The LLM can't answer it because it's a completely made up fact. Unless it's hallucinating, it will be unable to answer. And there was no context that could give us the answer, because we lost access to view document 1, 2, 3. And document 1, 2, 3 is where that text was that we embedded that indicated that Bill Gates is the one who won the Oscar for the best football movie in 2025. So because of that, that's why we lost access here. And yeah, that's it. Really, that is just kind of the pre-filter approach for RAG authorization with SpiceDB.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, a couple of things. One is, folks, if you have any questions, again, please put them in the chat, or if you've tried different approaches or something in the space, let us know. Two, so I actually wrote an article, or like a how-to on dev.to, explaining this process. So I thought it'll be fun to see what Bill Gates winning an Oscar for best football movie would look like. It actually generated something that looked kind of like this. Let me just take over the screen for a second, Evan. Yeah. I don't know if you can see it, but just a second, I have to share that. Not bad, but everyone seems to be doing the whole Studio Ghibli thing online right now. I know if people have seen that meme going around. Share screen. There we go. Yeah, fairly accurate, I'd say.
Oh wow, that's pretty good. Yeah,
that's pretty good. Yeah. Although when you do try and generate images of like real life people on ChatGPT, it says no, copyright we can't, but we can generate a likeness of someone who's like 60 plus years old, has glasses and gray hair, that sort of thing. So I think this is pretty close.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I have a question, Evan. So assuming the same example in terms of like the flow, how would you do something like this with the post filter approach, right? With
Yeah.
SpiceDB, what would the flow look like? And feel free to share screen if you need.
Yeah. I think it's probably easiest just to talk through it. So that it changes the order of things, right? And I think that's kind of implicit in the names of the approaches. There's the pre-filter, and then there's the post-filter approach, right? So in the post-filter approach, all of the authorization is going to be happening between when we query the Pinecone serverless index, and then when we provide that data to the prompt, or when we augment our prompt with that data. So we're going to get a list of embeddings. Typically, these embeddings are actually going to be ranked in order of prevalence. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to post-filter through these embeddings in order of relevance until we have a desired number to go ahead and augment our prompt with. So perhaps maybe in our search, maybe we get back a lot of embeddings. Maybe we get back 1,000 embeddings, and we have access. Maybe we're lucky, we have access to all 1,000 embeddings. Well, it's unlikely that you're actually going to want to augment your prompt with 1,000 embeddings. Most folks I've talked to are augmenting their prompts with somewhere between like 5 to 10 embeddings. I mean, there's different use cases out there, but that seems to be kind of the common number. So what you're going to do is you're actually going to use the SpiceDB check permission API. Actually, more likely, you're going to use the bulk check permission API, or check bulk as it's now called, to go ahead, and you're going to filter through all of those results you've gotten back by looking at the metadata attached to the embeddings, checking if you have permission to view the object that is there in the metadata, and then you're just going to keep going through until you get the desired number of authorized embeddings. And so that is kind of one thing with that kind of that post filter approach that makes it work fairly well in situations where you have a fairly high hit rate, is that you don't need to filter through the whole list of returned embeddings. Typically, you're just going to filter through until you get that desired number of embeddings that you need to augment your prompt.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't think we have like the workshop for that, but we do have the workshop for what Evan just showed us. Feel free to DIY it or do it yourself, because the entire process is described in github.com/authors/workshops. If you check the branches, there are different branches for the ones with Google Colab, but also if you just want to run it off of a Jupyter notebook locally, you can also do that, and it's all described in the link below. We also have other workshops if you're interested, including one not related to RAG pipelines, but just updating views based on permissions within your permission system. So that was recently uploaded. So check that out.
Sounds like we need a post filter sequel maybe in
Yes.
the next few
Yeah.
months.
Yeah. I think we do. Yeah. Not too many questions yet, Evan, but we can maybe wait for 5 more minutes. If there are no questions, we can call it. Any other trends you're seeing when you're speaking to customers regarding, the whole auth and LLMs and RAG and AI and stuff like that?
Yeah. I mean, the other kind of authorization interesting tidbit we're seeing is folks starting to think about agentic authorization. And so a lot of agentic authorization is actually pretty much just RAG authorization. So a lot of what agents are doing is going out and fetching information and displaying that information to users, right? So we could think of like maybe I've seen a lot of these AI chatbots pop up on like like documentation sites, something like that. I guess a documentation site probably isn't a great example because most of that data is public. But you could think of maybe you have some private enterprise docs or something along those lines, and you might have an enterprise bot that needs to know who you are, so you've authenticated, and then now it's like, okay, can you view certain docs? Or what can I show you? What can't I show you? So a lot of these, agentic authorization is actually really just kind of RAG authorization. But we're also starting to see kind of agents doing more than just like displaying data, right? So going out and actually taking actions on behalf of users. And so It's really is important that kind of folks are, have kind of a game plan for, how much privilege am I going to give to these, agentic workforces, right? So thinking about, do I want these agents to simply inherit the permissions of the user who is speaking with the agent? So sometimes we are seeing that where, hey, if a user can edit this page, then the agent should be able to go and edit this page. And things like Zanzibar and relationship-based access control actually lend themselves very easy to impersonation. The kind of the flexible model that tools like SpiceDB provide and relationship access-based provide allow it really easy to kind of incorporate impersonation into your schemas. So we're seeing that pop up, and then we're also seeing users thinking about, well, actually, I want the agent to inherit a subset of permissions of users, and so we've had some conversations of like, okay, how do we think about that? What are the criteria for what permissions our agent needs to inherit, and kind of baking some of that logic into the SpiceDB schema, so that we can ensure that the agents are inheriting the correct subset of permissions. It really is an exciting time. I mean, these agents are so capable and are clearly capable of really, I think, redefining how we perform a lot of tasks. It's we just have to be kind of cautious, I think, and make sure they're doing what we want them to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because everyone's talking about the age of, agentic AI and AI agents. And even recently, Sam Altman in an interview was like, hey, look, as a company, OpenAI is not interested in small time advertisements or even looking at things like individual subscriptions as their main revenue stream, but more like having an agent do a software engineer's job or a DevOps person's job and stuff. I think long term down the line. So I think authorization will play a super important role in how those agents can behave and what they can access based on the permissions that they have.
Yeah, definitely. It's exciting.
It is exciting. We have a couple of folks who have met at least seen on Discord. We have Conwiley. Conwiley, yes, all of our streams, everything is it's on our YouTube channel. So please subscribe. We could use. I want to reach the 1,000 subscriber mark very soon. So yes, please hit that subscribe button. And it's on our YouTube channel. So swing by. And also Yordis, nice to hear from you, one of our regular viewers. Also Yordis, Conwiley, or anyone else in the stream, if you're going to be at KubeCon next week, a few of us from AuthZ will be there. So make sure you swing by our booth. We have the special swag to give folks from the community. So, just give the secret handshake there and you'll get the special swag. Yeah. All right. Again, Conwiley, Yordis, if you have any questions, just feel free to put it in chat. We'll probably be here a few more minutes. Else we could, And Evan, we definitely have to do the post-filtering stream at some point of time and whip up that demo as well.
Yes, definitely. I would love to do that. I think it would be exciting, and it's definitely. Oh, we have a question. It looks like a few questions.
Oh yeah, sweet. Let's hit Conwiley's questions first. How would setting up fine-grained auth compare to giving the agent access via an API key?
Sure. So there's a few different things. So an API key would. Well, it wouldn't be able to be as fine-grained, right? So if you have an API key, you're not likely going to this API key and saying that you have access to article 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6. And if you did do that, it might be kind of complex to come up with that list of very specific objects that user has access to. With something a fine-grained access kind of system like SpiceDB, we're actually able to provide that fine-grained access through relationships, right? So we're able to say, okay, this user belongs to this group, this user belongs to this role, maybe he also belongs to this role, and then maybe there's some other logic that's going into that. And then because we're going to have all the data centralized in SpiceDB, when that user goes and checks, do they have permission to go do something? It's going to be there. It's going to be centralized. It's going to be able to provide fine-grained. It's going to be scalable. A lot of this isn't API key specific, but I see something similar with like JOTs, JSON Web Tokens, where folks are loading up their JSON web tokens with so much data, so much information that they're now exceeding header limits, right? And I think it's a slightly different question because we're talking about an API key, not a JOT. But I think there's a similar issue kind of at play here, right? Now, it is worth mentioning that maybe the API key is actually just an authentication mechanism, right? I was kind of thinking there like it would be like a JOT. And if it is just like an authentication mechanism, then API keys are in that sense, very compatible actually with a relationship-based access control system like SpiceDB, because you're just using the API key to authenticate, and then on the back end, SpiceDB is making those authorization decisions. So yeah,
pretty much. I mean, just to add to what Evan said, I think both with using a JOT or an API key for like authorization stuff, you're using something that wasn't like ideally or isn't meant ideally for authorization, but you're using like a solution to whip something up. And I think the approach that Evan mentioned makes a lot of sense, where you use an API key to see if someone has, this person can access it, and then what permissions does the AI agent have. You use something like SpiceDB or fine-grained auth. So question from Julian, which is, if I have a large set of documents and metadata, do you have recommendations on how to get that into SpiceDB?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we're typically, the good news about this and why using a kind of a Zanzibar-based system like SpiceDB for RAG authorization is helpful is because this is actually a system that you can use for your non-RAG authorization as well. So if you're already a user of SpiceDB, you don't have to do much, and that's what we're seeing actually. Is we're seeing a lot of users of SpiceDB for other use cases saying, hey, now I want to start doing RAG. And it's like, great, the data is already in SpiceDB, and now we're covering both use cases at once. Now, if you're not a user of SpiceDB, we're typically seeing folks have to migrate data from their existing relational databases into SpiceDB. There's a few ways that you can kind of perform that migration, and then also kind of keep that up to date, right? So a lot of times what we're seeing folks do is we're just kind of seeing folks do kind of a bulk read from their database, and then using our import bulk APIs to go ahead and then import that data into the database, and then using and then kind of keeping I guess you call it like a ledger of changes, and applying that ledger of changes from when they did the bulk export up until present time to then get everything up to date. And that's kind of how a lot of we're seeing folks kind of perform that initial kind of bulk load in, at least at a very high level. That's how we're seeing it. And then kind of as you're going, there's a few different kind of ways we've seen people just kind of keep data up to date over time. So we are seeing folks that are using a dual write approach. So they are making a write to SpiceDB, and then they're making a write to their relational database at the same time, assuming that they need the data in both places. And then we're even seeing people use like durable workflow tools like Temporal to kind of help with some of the transactionality of it, and helping to maintain kind of consistent states across these what are now two distributed systems. So that's one approach we're seeing. Another approach we're seeing is folks just using their existing relational database as a source of truth. So they're just going ahead and writing the data to the relational database, and then they're actually using change data capture technologies and tools like Debezium and Kafka to go ahead and actually stream those updates from the relational databases to SpiceDB. Obviously, that's asynchronous. It's more asynchronous. So that's one consideration with that approach, but it's working for a lot of people.
Yeah, and just shouting out. So Tanner, a software engineer at Outset, has written a great blog post on this whole dual write thing, and the two of us did a live stream on it, I think, a couple of weeks ago as well, where we discussed these different approaches of how you would dual write, which also includes things like using, like a durable execution environment like temporal. Some interesting stuff if that's the stuff that floats your boat. So do check that out. Yeah.
I think that was my favorite office hours that we've done so far. It was just kind of an interesting lesson on distributed systems and maintaining state across distributed systems. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, agree. It was pretty cool. Another interesting question from Convili, which is, could you touch on the subject of physical/logical multi-tenancy in the FGA concept in general, and how SpiceDB relates to it?
Yeah, absolutely. So most of our users have some concept of tenancy. And the most common way to implement tenancy in SpiceDB is with schema. So most folks are enforcing tenancy at like an organization level. We do even see some folks explicitly modeling tenant objects in SpiceDB. And essentially what folks are doing is they're assigning members to tenants. So they're relating members to tenants. And then downstream, objects are somehow rolling up to these tenants. And they're basically saying they're using the tenant membership as an intersection with another criteria. So they might say, okay, you can view the document if you're related to the document as a viewer, and you are a member of this document's tenant or a member of this document's organization. So that's the most common approach people are using, is they are kind of using intersections to kind of enforce this tenancy and ensure people aren't, having permissions outside of their tenant. And that covers, it seems like, probably 90-something% of folks. If you need more tenancy isolation, a lot of folks, like, for example, some folks have isolated deployments, right? So maybe you have a completely isolated deployment for one customer. And what folks are doing there is they're just rolling out isolated deployments of SpiceDB for that specific customer. That is kind of the more extreme use cases. We don't see that very often. And in most cases, it is adequate to just enforce tenancy at the schema level.
Is it worth mentioning like an author dedicated here as well, Evan? Like in terms of pure like workload isolation?
Yeah, absolutely. So our kind of flagship SaaS product is Auth dedicated. And so Auth dedicated, it's kind of a private SaaS, or we're more IaaS. So I'm starting to say IaaS now, or kind of it's a private IaaS solution where when you go ahead and you become a SpiceDB dedicated customer, we deploy an AWS account dedicated to you. And then all of the resources in that account are obviously dedicated to you as well. So all of the compute, all of the storage, it's completely dedicated to you as a customer of SpiceDB. So there's no multi-tenancy beyond, obviously, all the multi-tenancy you just get by using a public cloud, right? And so that's kind of how we're handling our per customer isolation. It's kind of how we've been able to get a lot of customers that are in super restricted and regulated industries that aren't used to using SaaS. We're actually able to convince them to use SaaS because there is a lot of kind of nice things that come with that level of isolation in terms of like compliance and security.
Yeah, and of course, with something like permissions and authorization, you need like absolute low latency and performance and all of that. So having a customer that runs at a scale of, a large enterprise, they sometimes need things like, oh, we don't need noisy neighbors to prevent, any unexpected fluctuations in performance, right? So I think like having a dedicated workload makes sense. I think there's a follow-up question as well, which is, could we go with a resource ID prefix approach to achieve separation by tenancy?
It's a good question. We don't recommend it because this means there's going to. So when we think about SpiceDB schemas, right, we think of them as fairly static objects that are typically only changed by the developers, right? We think of a schema like we think of code, right? So just like you think of Golang code or Java code, we think of this as something that is typically only going to be mutated by the developers of the application. We don't really have any nice mechanisms to kind of mutate it programmatically. I'm not saying you can't figure it out. Obviously, it's API driven, and there are definitely ways you could figure out how to parse the schema to be able to import specific prefix objects. But we don't recommend it because there would be a lot you'd have to figure out, right? It's like in terms of like, implementing all of the object IDs for the specific prefix. And then like, what happens if I want to change how I define a specific object type in my schema? Okay, well now I'm going to have to change that for every single prefix. And if I have thousands of customers, that's not going to be super maintainable. And like I said, we don't really have any niceties to kind of help with the management of that. And so for that reason, we don't recommend prefixing the object definitions. Now, I'm realizing I may have just misread your question because I'm seeing resource ID prefix as a way to achieve tenancy, and that is actually more valid. So using a prefix on the IDs to achieve tenancy is definitely something we have seen before, and is definitely something you could use to help you enforce tenancy. So sorry, I kind of misunderstood your question there up front. But yes, using prefixes on IDs is okay. Using prefixes on object definition names, I would recommend against.
Sweet. Yep. And Kunwali, if you have any follow-up questions, yeah, I think, I was referring to options in the SDK, like optional resource ID prefix. And
yes. Yep. Sorry for misunderstanding your question there up front.
Yeah. Also, I think that answered your question though, Kunwali. So yeah. And Yordis, Shortcut, I know KubeCon is an expensive conference to go to now, but hey, Shortcut, why don't you, apply for the CFP perhaps next year? If you're based in Europe, Open Source Summit is happening in Amsterdam in August. So, that could be a good way as well to attend the conference. Yeah. And if you're there, let us know. Sweet. It answered Kunwali's questions as well. Awesome. Folks, if you have any follow-up questions, we are always on our Discord, or you can catch one of us on LinkedIn or wherever as well. We also stream every fortnight. We may stream from KubeCon next week. We're still trying to sort out the logistics of streaming live from KubeCon. I'm hoping to make it happen. I have some equipment in the back, so hopefully that'll happen, and you'll get like a first-person view, hopefully, of KubeCon and of how the OddZ booth looks like and what swag we have, etc. But if not that, we'll just meet in a couple of weeks, I guess. So Kunwali and Yordis and Julian and everyone else who's watching, thank you so much. Evan, thank you again. We'll have you soon for the second part of this demo, I think, on the post-filtering.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. And everyone else, hopefully see you from a KubeCon live stream or else in a couple of weeks. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and see you soon. Bye.